Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema. Exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from the science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic.
Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the Darkly Splendid Abodes. Edward Mason has been a regular guest on Darkly Splendid Abodes going back to our very first episode. But just who is this fellow with the English accent, who evidently lives in Mexico and yet has apparent magical ties to Toronto? Today, Edward shares his own journey and experiences from a lifetime on the magical path, from involvement with various orders to founding his own temple, and up to the past 14 years spent with the Temple of the Silver Star.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love and a will.
Welcome back, Edward. So thanks for joining me once again. And today we're going to be talking about you.
Absolutely wonderful. The fabulous story of my amazing life that I managed to steer through the reefs and shallows and forests of life without any help from anybody else, right? Of course.
Yeah. So
you sound like you believe me. Keep the skepticism in place, please, Darren. Come on.
You know, we've had one or two people kind of asking, who is this guy? Basically wanting to get to know you a little bit better and that sort of thing. And I think, you know what? From your perspective, like you've had a rich and storied life going through different circles and different circumstances and that sort of thing. So it seems like there'd be a lot to share there. So I thought it might be nice to delve into that a little bit. So I guess we could start. I don't know if you had plans from where to start from, but I guess we could start from the beginning and just sort of say, what was your draw into magic in the first place? Was it magic? Because sometimes people they'll be attracted to the idea of doing magic tricks, not like stage show performance stuff, but I mean like, you know, having magical powers of some sort, or they'll have a draw to some form of spirituality, some expression of spirituality that tends to, you know, usually be associated with mysticism.
Right. I'm going to go right back. I'll keep this as brief as possible. I'm 13 years old. I'm an insecure kid in an English high school.
I thought you were much older than that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. No, I joined the school music society, which is focused on classical music. And it's our annual concert trip up to London. I lived about 40 miles outside of London. So I'm in the Royal Albert Hall, and there's a really good concert. And there's this piece by Gustav Holst. Now, most people know that Gustav Holst wrote The Planets. It's his famous thing. Nobody seems to know much of anything else, which is a shame because he was one heck of a composer. And there's this piece called The Hymn of Jesus. And I thought, well, okay, I'll sit through a Christian piece of music. It's only, part of the evening. And this thing starts off, it uses two ancient Latin hymns. And I'd read in the program note that the words were taken from the Acts of St. John, which is an apocryphal text. It's not part of the standard New Testament. But Holst had translated some words from a passage in this where Jesus has his disciples. I think it's sort of a different version of the Last Supper. And he gets them dancing around the table. Now, this thing starts very quietly, then Holst does a complete change of gears and gets your attention. He's lulled you in thinking it's going to be all quiet and smooth. And the chorus cuts in. And then suddenly you're into this thing where Jesus is coming out with these amazing statements about, ye who dance not know not what we are knowing. All things join in the dance. And so I'm sitting there at 13 years old. My religious experience was of a little bit of Anglicanism. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there thinking, is this allowed in religion? I mean, this is really fun music. It's very fast-paced. It's a dance. It's a mystical dance. I'd never come across this before. And from that moment, I could say I was curious about what does this mysticism stuff mean? What's it all about? And here's something that I wouldn't have been able to put it in those terms, but it's like it goes to non-duality. Mm-hmm. Black and white, all, the Jesus in this passage, in these lyrics, transcends that. So I, got an album with that piece on, played it again and again and again. I still love that piece of music. And that kind of set me up. I didn't know what I was going to do with this. I'm 13, remember. I don't know a damn thing. A few years later, we're into the mid-60s. And now let's say I'm 16. And suddenly, everybody's got a guru. The Beatles going off to India. Everyone else is chasing stuff. And I'm starting to look more deeply into this mysticism stuff. Well, what's it all about? I'm buying books on Buddhism. Buddhism seems fun. And I was also aware that there was Magick, which I was immediately drawn to without knowing why Kabbalistic stuff was drawing me. But I was buying books by Dion Fortune and William Gray and Gareth Knight and borrowing books from people who had the other ones. And the Tree of Life-based magic was beyond my ability to put together, but I could see that there was clearly a very intelligent perspective in there. So I'm kind of getting set up for something, and I figure, okay, I think I'll be a Buddhist. That'll do. Now, there was a third factor here, not just music, mystical music, everyone having a guru, but also this group, the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to whiz us back to the time just before I was born. Everyone knows the story about Jack Parsons. Yeah. In California, there's Jane Wolfe and Phyllis Seckler there, and a lot of the other heavies from the early times of Thelema. And L. Ron Hubbard shows up. He's kind of at a loose end. Very brilliant guy, Ron, and more than slightly crazy and deeply paranoid. Now, the official story is he steals his boat and some cash from Parsons and steals Parsons' girlfriend. What he really stole, if you can call it that, was the idea of a systematic way through to understanding. Mm. Parsons is serious, and he's explaining about the Tree of Life. You deal with the 4 elements, and when you get to a certain point, there is a profound and unifying experience that we in Thelema will call knowledge and conversation. A couple of years after, there is L. Ron Hubbard. And he's talking about MEST, matter, energy, space, and time, our 4 elements, and a state that he calls clear. He's tried to sort of come up with a system that takes the elements of getting as far as knowledge and conversation, and he wants to market it to the world as a kind of psychotherapy. And you have to be fair, it gives people a lot of cool experiences. You can't just dismiss Scientology. All right, that's 1947, 48, 49, around there. A lot else happens with Scientology. But early 60s, when just around the time I'm hearing the Hymn of Jesus, there are 2 people who get involved with Scientology in London. One is Mary Ann McLean, who is a Scotswoman who has been a call girl, and we don't know anything. She really screened her own past. And anyone who might have known her in the magical community at that time is now dead. Gareth Knight, Kenneth Grant, whoever she might have met, they're all gone. And there's no records. But she clearly had delved into tarot and astrology and a whole load of other stuff, and was aware of the Shem HaMephorash, that document with all of the names of the angels. So she'd been around something. She becomes an auditor in Scientology, and one day a guy called Robert Moore at that time, he comes in, he becomes one of her pre-clears, as they call them, and she starts taking him through Scientology training. To cut out a whole load of stuff, a few months later, she has a big row with the Scientology people. She leaves with Robert, who was in the process of leaving his first wife. And they start this thing called The Process, after first calling it compulsions analysis. It's kind of Scientology light. That goes through a whole series of evolutions. At one point, because the world is ending, they've decided they go off to Mexico and they end up on the coast of Yucatan, and everyone's having amazing realizations. And they come back to England. And they were very intense, charismatic people. When you met them, they were very, very much in the moment, very mindful. And they were looking right at you, and you felt somebody was looking into your soul when you met these folks at first. Fast forward 3 years, I have a spiritual crisis one night where I just realized how utterly useless my life is. This was my 20-year-old mind interpreting itself to itself under the impact, obviously, of an HGA message like, you've got to get going here. It's taking you too long to do anything. And that was succeeded the next morning by an extraordinary, painful yet ecstatic state of seeing just light all around me with not just as a doctrine, but as an intuition that God is love. Now, don't ask me what God is. I still can't tell you. But it was obviously nothing like the Anglican deity that Holst had already shown me was only one way of looking at the divine. I joined these people in the process. So remember, Scientology came out of Thelema. It's a kind of bare bones of lower part of the tree of life process. The process takes the essence of Scientology, simplifies it still further, but then becomes a Gnostic religious cult. So Thelema starts getting smuggled back in. The idea that you need to equilibrate all the different elements of your own nature in order to find your own spiritual truth, that's built in. The idea that God involves both the conventional God and the Christ and Satan, which is one vast unity. That's the Thelemic idea of non-duality, that as you pass beyond the dualities, you come to a sense of going beyond that. The fact that all of this is attained by becoming very present in the immediate moment, dharana, that's in there. All of the basic bits of Thelema are in the process. So here I am in this nice, tight, crypto-fascist womb, as I referred to it, having a wonderful time for a while. You're going through spiritual self-searching and moments of despair, and then suddenly you've got voices inside you guiding you and all kinds of cool stuff. And for about a year and a half, I was really having a fabulous time. We all came out from Britain to North America. There was a branch in Toronto where I was sent because it was difficult for me to get immigration permission in the States. That's how I ended up in Toronto. And after about 8 or 9 months, I kind of realized I'm done with this thing. It's not going to deliver what I want. Because cults can't. The cult has to get conformity. It needs too much conformity. And if you start working on your true will too much, and you start having realizations that are too individual, you can't mesh with the cult anymore. It was a deeply interwoven community. We were very psychically attuned to each other, very intuitive, but I was just getting to a point feeling like this is not working for me. I can't make it happen anymore. Long story made short, I left in 1972. I ended up a couple of years later marrying a young woman that I'd met in the cult. And I was back in the middle classes, basically, because I had no idea what to do with that kind of astral consciousness that I'd had being in a cult. But when you're in a cultic situation, you're not just on planet Earth. You are your head is into an astral universe that the cult has produced. There were hundreds of cults all over the place at that time. And they all had their own little astral thing going.
Yeah, what year would this be around?
I joined the process in the summer of 1970. I quit the process in the summer of 72, got married in 74, and just rolled along for the next 20 years nearly. Wow. Before I had a bad patch in life. There was a series of deaths in the family that were very upsetting. There was a breakdown of the marriage. And I also went to work at one of the less enjoyable jobs I'd had that was leaving me completely a mess. I had a very insecure boss who could not possibly. I was on trade magazines at this time. That was my gig for the next 3 decades, longer. I had a boss who just couldn't let me do the job the way I felt it needed to be done. And we were just butting horns all the time, and her insecurities and my insecurities just were grating on each other.
Sounds like a sort of an analogy or a comparison between that and your experience with this cult, where you kind of had to give up your individuality if you wanted to pursue it further, and that was something that was chafing at you at that point.
Yeah, this is a theme. It recurs all the way through. And I think anyone who's really being honest about their autobiography, you don't leave everything that you are behind at a certain point. I've overcome everything. No, stuff just keeps resurfacing and has to be dealt with in a different context. Mm-hmm. Anyway, there I was, thinking, I know this woman is going to fire me. The process had left me with quite a good intuition, and I just knew at the beginning of 1991 that she was going to fire me. Mm. She had a habit of firing somebody every year, and I thought, it's my turn. I got the short straw, and I was right. And I thought, you're going to need something more to hold on to at this point. My now ex-wife was out of the picture. I was a single dad, and I thought, I can't just continue on as almost a member of the middle classes because I've never really fitted here. What I found was a little group in Toronto that I don't think is functioning anymore, the Order of the Silver Sword. Mm. They were giving some Kabbalah classes. And I thought, well, why don't I go down and see what these guys have got to offer? The group was mostly gay men, not entirely. I really liked Jamie Perry, the guy who was running things, but he was very ill, and in fact, he died less than a year later. But he did a full course on the Tree of Life, the paths, how the whole thing works in the Golden Dawn system. And I didn't follow up with them because, as I said, Jamie died, and the group kind of stalled at that point, and I think they eventually gave up. I had a new girlfriend fairly soon after. I used some of the Kabbalistic knowledge I picked up to work with her on a kind of we had a cult of 2 people, which was fine, and it got me through a whole load of things, and it helped me get over the aftermath of the divorce and stuff. But I began to wonder, what else do we get? Okay, 1994, my mother was very old and dying at this point in England. And it was suggested that I go back and make a final visit to see her. My dad had been one of the deaths that happened in the 1980s when my marriage was breaking up. So, okay, I went back to Britain, and I need something that's the opposite of my mother to read while I'm there. And I pulled William Gray's Ladder of Lights off my bookshelf and was reading it very intensely. And I guess the fact of knowing that her life was coming to an end, my life had been through a lot of changes, and all that stuff I'd learned from Jamie, it was beginning to gel in the back of my head. The book made a lot more sense to me in the end of 1994 than it ever had before. So when I came back from that visit, I thought, okay, I need to find a group. I've tried the Silver Sword again, but they kind of, no, nothing's happening. There was a lodge of the Fraternitas Lux Occulta, the Fraternity of the Hidden Light, operating in Toronto. I started hanging out with them on their monthly healing rituals, and they were saying, hey, you want to join? And I was thinking, well, maybe I will, but it wasn't, the spark wasn't happening. And what happened a week after solstice that year, the end of 94, they said there's this other Thelemic group in town. Oh dear, not Crowley. I'm not touching that, but I guess they just do a celebration, Return of the Light, a week after the solstice. All right, I'll try anything once, but I'm still an ABC guy, anything but Crowley. So there we are. It's about 40 people showed up to this, and then the lights dimmed, and this candlelit procession walked in. And I thought, whoa, this is carrying quite an energy. And I know this energy. What is it? This is so familiar to me. What is it? It was exactly what I had felt at the best moments when I was in the process back in the early 70s. It was the same vibe. Now, it was years before I realized that the process had been kind of a grandson of basic Thelema, but it still was carrying some of that 93 vibe with it. Anyway, it took a few months to organize things, but in August that year, 95, I joined the Temple of Thelema in Toronto. And I thought, okay, these folks seem together, they seem to be intelligent, it seems like it's a well-run organization with a really good program of initiations and then process of going through the Sephiroth one by one with a ceremony, with a lot of training materials, which is what I was after. Somebody teach me again. And I think it was when I got into the Yesod material about a year after I joined that I thought, wow, there's all this stuff on Kabbalistic psychology here, because that's the patterns in the psyche is what Yesod's about. And it suddenly hit me one night. It's taken you 20 years, but you're back in the same group you were in, or you're back in the same vibe, not the group, but it was the same current going through. So at this point, I've always been on one track without really appreciating that it was one track. It had to go through various thises and that's, do a bit of Buddhism in the 60s, not very much, join a mind-bending end of the world psychologically oriented cult in the early 70s, go through living life, knowing what I'd learned and trying to make sense of things. And finally, I'm onto something that seems really serious and seems to have people running it who have quite a serious degree of initiation themselves, so I can learn from these folks. So that was where I got started 30 years ago. I do remember at that initiation, there were a bunch of people from a small group the Temple of Thelema had operating near Indianapolis. One was a young guy called David Shoemaker. He was, I thought, doesn't seem very interesting. So I was polite, which was probably a good thing, but, obviously he's not very senior. I need to know who the big cheeses are, les fromage grand. So everything went fine. I went through a couple of degrees. The Thelema throws tests at you. It throws you into weird situations where you suddenly are in a strange, semi-tormented state of mind. I've got to deal with this. And either you throw it all up and say, okay, can't handle this, thank you, goodbye, or you push on through and you begin to get a bit more confidence and a bit more understanding. So I'm doing this Yesod material and thinking, okay, this is really cool. I know what I'm doing. I've chosen the right bunch of people. And then there's this whole sex scandal that was happening at the top of the order. In one sense, you'd think, how can Thelema have a sex scandal? It doesn't fit. But in the context of the times, the driving force of the order, Jim Eshelman, was in a bit of a mess. Phyllis Seckler was still alive and was the head of the order. And I still don't exactly know the truth of who was doing what with whom, because I've heard so many versions that eventually it's kind of like the origins of the Golden Dawn, that there's 5 different versions of exactly how it came to be. You just know that eventually in the late 1980s, they started that order and it did amazing stuff for the next decade. Anyway, the sex scandal or the scandal or the everybody getting upset with the vibes that were coming through the order, which at this point had 3 temples, one in Los Angeles, the Mother Temple. I think there was still one at that point in San Francisco, and there was us in Toronto. We were temple number 3. People quit. People, suddenly I found I was being blamed for why people needed to quit, which I thought, this is ridiculous. They were the senior people in the order well above me. I was just asking too many questions about what exactly is going on. There was a kind of a cult breakdown again, except this time, instead of me leaving the cult, I stayed and the old cult sort of broke away. And it was like, well, we need some new chiefs for the temple. And I thought, well, who's going to do that? And there's people pointing at me. Like, oh. This is not what I wanted. I mean, I just wanted to be a nice junior person and learn for a few years from more qualified people.
I know that feeling well.
Yes, you just might. What is it? Why me? What did I do? Where do I get this crummy karma from? Anyway, there's all kinds of stuff. It didn't do that well in the late 1990s because a year later, they ended up making me head of the group, and I was the only ordained Hierophant we had within the temple in Toronto. I was nowhere near ready to do that. I said I'd give it a try. You can count on me. And, of course, you can't count on me if I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Part of my education in the Temple of Thelema was always about being called on to do stuff that no one had ever shown me what was necessary. I just had to figure it out because there was nobody else around. Mm-hmm. And as an order, I try to say this without being gratuitously rude, but it was poorly run from the very top. There wasn't enough care given to nurturing the people in the different groups across the continent. And there was always a sense of stumbling and not knowing quite where we were headed. It was unquestionably an order that, through the 90s, really called down Thelemic power. It really had the energy coming through. There was no question that when we set up for our monthly ritual, I felt there was something. The moment the temple was set up, altars and pillars and regalia, and the lights go down, it's like, whoa, we are not, we're not in Toronto anymore. We've gone somewhere else. It just became dysfunctional after the late 90s. The temple in Toronto, people started leaving. I mean, I was supposed to be leading it, but I didn't have the ability to bring people up. I was on the Netzach degree of the thing, 4/7 in the old Golden Dawn system, which is nowhere near being ready to function as a full Hierophant in a Golden Dawn style temple. Remember, the TOT had been set up to take the Golden Dawn tradition and fill an area that wasn't being supplied. You had the OTO as a Masonic order. Jim Eshelman had actually been in the running to head that when Hymenaeus Beta took over, but it went to Hymenaeus Beta, and Jim stayed in for 5 or 6 years, then quit. You had the AA, and already there were the AA wars about, our lineage is better than your lineage, and our lineage is the purer one, and this is it was getting to be messy. Mm-hmm. But if you wanted to do AA, you really needed an education in magic, and taking a Golden Dawn system and putting it, in a more Thelemic version, updating all the rituals, putting in quotes from the holy books and phrases from the holy books and quote Crowley's own teachings, created an entry point. It was a lot easier for people to go into AA and think, okay, I know what we're dealing with here. I understand the tree of life because I've been through a fair chunk of it. I get how the tree works as a system. I get how the psychology of the tree works. I get Thelemic philosophy because I've been inside a group of people trying to make it happen. I still, to this day, feel that temple system is an essential thing for many people trying to become Thelemic magicians or Thelemic Gnostics, wherever you lean, because not everyone is really a magician's magician in Thelema.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed in, it went from being a full temple down to a tiny little group of just two of us at one point in the early 2000s. People left, people moved on. I stuck it out. And if I have one grand message from my entire career in Thelema, it was just keep on keeping on. Something at a certain point will flip around. Something opens if you wait, but you're not going to know what it is. Your tarot cards won't tell you. Your I Ching reading won't tell you. None of the divinatory methods will actually tell you how things are going to open. But if you keep on, you endure to the end, you do your own perdurabo, then you get somewhere with this system. Mm-hmm. So all the time I was there in Toronto without a teacher for 2,000 miles of distance. I was learning stuff the hard way, just from my own sticking to it, clinging on to this thing as the one center of meaning in my life, and appreciating that there was something very special about Thelema. It was real. I'd had that process training decades earlier that gave me a certain orientation toward what Thelemic philosophy is meant to feel like. So that was, I'm compressing a lot of detail and a lot of anecdotes I could throw out, but that was the key thing. I was just sticking to it, and I had an in from my early training in my 20s, and I just stayed with it, and I felt I was gradually getting through the system.
Two things stand out to me there. One is, again, that idea of the sort of cult versus the individualistic sort of perspective, so that it seems like there's a tendency to these groups to become, gradually congeal into a cult sort of formation. And I don't want to have either positive or negative connotations to that, just sort of noting the natural sort of way that things seem to go. And then you have the sort of schism that happens of like the individual, whether it's the individual leaving the cult or the cult itself kind of falling apart. And there's that the fact that you're stuck in a position where you have to figure things out. You're not being guided. You're not getting that guidance that you were looking for necessarily. You're actually having to become the guide to some extent or another. And I mean, I jokingly mentioned that I recognize that kind of feeling. It seems to me like there's a resonance. Like what I experienced coming into the Thelemic community was pretty much the same kind of patterns. So yes, I can't help but think that there's something to that,
In a sense, you need a bit of a cult to make something work. And I've often outraged people who've told me how dreadful cults are. I've always had this comeback line of everyone in their early 20s should join a cult. Number one, you get a very
college.
Intense. That some colleges, they tend to be a bit culty. You have to find your own, the thing that works for you. But you need to have that sense of deep bonding with people to find out more about yourself. That's part of growing up. You need to make some stupid mistakes. You need to make enemies where you could have had friends. You need to find all of those things that you do so that you know about them. And a cult will also open you up to wider ideas that on your own you just couldn't get to. At the same time, you need to leave that cult when you're ready, which could be, after, like with me, it was 2 years in the process. Marvelous experience. I mean, I've still got friends that, I see very rarely, but we'll stay in touch online. And there's still that, we have a shared experience thing here. And we're glad we're not stuck in that regulated lifestyle. But didn't we have some really cool outlooks on the world, different perspectives and ways of appreciating the chaos and difficulty happening in the world right now? it gave us something to hang on to. And with an esoteric order, there is a very delicate balance to maintain between the goodness of the cult, the sense of community, the shared sense of values, collective acceptance that there's a code of behavior that should not be violated. You have a sanctuary that's in the middle of this, an invisible house there standeth. You need that. At the same time, you need to make sure that you have a life completely outside of your esoteric order. You need friends and family and, hobbies and just interests that don't directly coincide with it. And there's always a difficult balance there. You look at MacGregor Mathers becoming too dogmatic, and of course he had the revolt in the Golden Dawn in 1900. There started being schism in the Temple of Thelema at the end of the 1990s after the scandal. A small group broke away and survived for a while under the leadership of Jim's former partner, Anacrea King. I think that group is defunct now. Anacrea died some years ago herself. And then I noticed that there weren't many of the adepts staying in the order. It was just... Here's where I have to tread carefully because I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but Jim Eshelman, who was the head of the temple, is a brilliant writer, a wonderful expounder of Kabbalistic teaching. I still quote things he told me to students. But he was a very poor leader in the sense that he could not delegate. So Phyllis Seckler died, I think, in 2004. And Jim became, supremo in the Temple of Thelema. At this point, there's one temple in Los Angeles and now one temple in New York, and the groups proneoi. The proneos means before the temple. Small groups in San Francisco and Toronto, and a few stragglers across the continent. And the big break came 2008, I think it was, when David Shoemaker, the guy that I hadn't been that impressed with when I first met him, who had now risen to the second position in the temple, and was finding Jim harder and harder to keep focused. David broke away. I don't know whether there was a third temple at that point in Sacramento or whether David had a large pronaos. Anyway, there was a body of people who left with him. He just felt that Jim was slacking off, not doing what he needed to do. There was a whole load of stuff that I don't think I should be discussing publicly. But I knew that the temple was not at its peak. We kind of passed that, but we were still okay. Like on the Titanic, half an hour after it hit the iceberg, we're a bit lower in the water, but we're doing all right. No problems yet. Let's serve some more, martinis in the first-class ballroom. While the officers are desperately trying to get the collapsible lifeboats together because they know they're going to abandon ship. So David left and started the Temple of the Silver Star. And, he was such a dreadful, evil, awful person. And, how could he have done this? And, not lowest of the low, et cetera, et cetera.
He must have been a black brother.
Yeah, except that I don't think he's anything remotely like that. I had a bit of an exchange with him at the time, asking about his motives and the way he was doing it, which seemed a bit ham-fisted to me at the time from what I knew. But I said, I hope it shakes up Jim Eshelman. Well, now you've got a problem because actually 2 grand chiefs had left the order. And the third was living with her mother back in New York State because she'd had a couple of several ischemic attacks, minor strokes. She needed care. There's nobody running the order, really. And I thought, who's going to take over? And it's like, I know the script here. It happened in Toronto before. And I can remember Jim sending me an email about, I might have something good to offer you in a couple of months. And I thought, but what are you being coy about? Everyone's gone. I'm the most senior active person around. I've been in this temple now for 13 years. I'm pretty steady. Who are you going to call? The Ghostbuster. So this is my last dig at Jim, but I have to say it because it exemplifies what was going on. He sent me an email. I'd like to talk to you on the phone on Thursday at such and such a time. Okay, Jim, I'll be waiting. And I had some questions to ask him about what would be involved in being one of the Grand Chiefs. So he said, well, but, I want you to know, I want you to be a pause for drama, Grand Chief. I said, yeah, right, yeah. I gather, I guess. My superior psychic skills say you're out of senior people. There's one other guy, who came in, and the lady who had the ischemic attack still remained in place, which was arguable. Anyway, I put a couple of questions to Jim. We chatted a bit. And then I said at the end, look, Jim, I just want one thing, which is I want access to you. I want to be able to phone you if there's something I really think is important. And Jim says, well, you phone this number. It's on my display on my phone. Okay, no problem, done. Thanks, right, 93 and bye. I'd forgotten a key question. I can't even remember now what it was, but I phoned him right back. And recording clicks in. The subscriber to this number has asked that this phone receive no incoming calls. You laughed. I laughed at the time. I thought he sucker punched you. I wanted to help. I liked the guy. I would love to sit down one of these days with Eshma and say, look, I'll buy you a beer. You rant at me for 10 minutes, but then I need to explain to you, why I left and why 5 other people left around the same time. And so I wasn't sure what to do. I'm hanging in as I'm in the order, but it's not really feeling meaningful anymore. The one thing I'd always wanted was to be the equivalent of 5-6 Golden Dawn, and to be an ordained hierophant in the system. That was the only thing I wanted. I felt that sort of gave me the badge of legitimacy to be a teacher within the order, rather than just hoping inspiration would strike like lightning. I'd have access to a bit more stuff. So I stayed in as a Grand Chief for 2 years. And it started a process where Jim stopped replying to my emails. And finally, in 2010, 2011, I think, I said, I'm resigning as a Grand Chief, because it's no good asking me to be one of your 3 chief advisors and to take a senior responsibility when I can't even get the head of the order to communicate with me. He was becoming more and more withdrawn into himself, producing some wonderful prose that he published. His books, I unhesitatingly recommend Jim's books. Read them. Best Thelemic Kabbalist theorist out there. But as somebody running an order, he needed somebody else to keep him on track, and he wouldn't let other people take on the everyday stuff. And later that year, I made a final visit down to LA and thought, nah, this is over. I'm just going to quit now. And I was sort of at a loose end for a while. I had a couple of discussions with people in Toronto. They were not happy with what had happened to the group in Toronto since I'd left, because at a certain point in the early 2000s, it began to grow again. We'd been this little tiny proneos, as I said, 2 members. And I think we had about 7, maybe 8 people altogether at one point, round about 2010, when my job ended after the financial crash. And I thought, okay, I have to advance my plan to go and retire and live cheap in Mexico. So the next thing was starting Temple of Our Lady of the Stars, which we inaugurated, I think it was spring of 2012.
Yeah.
And no, it was just 4 or 5 of us, 4 of us at the start. But it was welcomed by people because, again, there was a sense that we've been abandoned, we've been run from the New York group. And New York and Toronto have totally different vibes. The two cities, they look kind of similar. Toronto has the second highest number of high-rises of any city in North America after New York. But there's that famous Peter Ustinov quote that Toronto seems like New York built by the Swiss. It's clean, it's tranquil, it's not crime-ridden. It's not New York. And there was I felt a grinding there between the people in Toronto trying to keep this thing going with the gang in New York who had a totally different view of how to do things. Mm-hmm. So we had the Temple of Our Lady of the Stars, which very gradually grew. And I found myself, yet again, I've got to teach people, now from the viewpoint of the head of an order. Mm-hmm. I've never been a head of an order before, and I don't quite know how to do it. You suddenly find it's a much bigger job than it looks like. From the outside, it just looks like you're a sort of esoteric office manager. But you're not, because you have a spiritual responsibility to all of the people in it. You need to have care of everybody in it. You need to make sure that you are not picking on somebody unconsciously. You are maintaining a balance. You're maintaining a tone. You're always communicating how things should be. And you need a contact at a very high level to bring through what is necessary.
Mm-hmm. I think the sort of mission statement of an order as well comes into play strongly, whether intentionally or not. Like I recall with the Temple of Thelema, for instance, there was this idea of trying to create more and more temples. Like they had this whole mandate of 10 temples in 10 years.
In 10 years, yeah. Yes. And we went from 3 temples to 2 temples.
I felt like that was, to me, that was like eye-opening. In a lot of ways, my experience has always been observing how these groups of people work and the kind of results, like the expectations that people have in trying to govern these groups and spearhead things versus the actual results of a lot of the things that come out of it and that sort of thing. And in that case, it really taught me that the business sort of statement of a group like that really has an effect on things that's not necessarily intentional or intended.
Right, yeah. You've got these very high aims. You are trying to hold to those standards. You are also a fallible human being. You are trying to do grade work of your own with the demands of a particular sephira, which is obviously always going to throw you a little bit, off to one side or the other of the tree, unless you're directly working from Tefereth, and then you're working from one point in the tree. So there's always a sense of needing to maintain a certain practical humility. You need to have confidence, and you need to know that you're not perfect. You need to be consistent, knowing that you're an inconsistent person. And there is a certain point where you just want to scream, like, how do I deal with myself in the middle of this? And it is intensely educational, because you come into an order and think, okay, I just go through this, and at each separate grade or degree, I learn more and I become more illuminated, and you find you've just got a different perspective on the problems of living, in the deepest and most meaningful sense possible. What is the center of my life? What is it I'm actually about? Mm-hmm. You can see here a pattern. You can see where my true will is emerging from that thing when I was 13 and a piece of music knocks me flat. Like ecstatic religion, I didn't know that existed. Mm-hmm. All the way through to becoming a teacher in a tradition of religious ecstasy. At the same time, knowing that other people have had far more consistent, profound experiences in their lives than I have, and thinking, gosh, I wish that I had done X. I always felt, though, that a big part of what I had to teach, once I got used to the idea, was not I can confer this amazing Kabbalistic wisdom, as I can show you that I know all the 57 different varieties of ways to screw up. I've always felt that is a big part of the job I do. Look, remember, you are still human, and you're going to trip over your own feet or your own temple shoes, whatever it is, and stumble through this, and then you have to pick yourself up and keep going.
Yeah,
that's the one thing that really, I've said it in 595 different ways, but it's the same thing that if I have anything to teach anybody, it's like you stumble through stuff. You don't know where you're really headed, but you develop a confidence that there is something that is leading to you toward ultimately itself, step by step, sephira by sephira, path by path, practice by practice, year by year, life experience by life experience. So if I know anything, it's just like I hung in because I couldn't find anything better to do with my time.
and I guess on that note, like, can you maybe share some of like the personal, critical kind of spiritual experiences that you might have had over the years at various points during this journey?
Often they're inverted ones. I find that things break when I reach a dead point. I actually quit the Temple of Thelema, for example, in 2001, when I had my first big argument with Jim Eshelman. And right after the 9/11 events in New York, I thought, you know what, you need to go back in there. Something has changed for everybody, not just Americans. And it happened that doing a tarot reading July or August of 2001, the priestess card from my tarot deck just disappeared under a chest of drawers. So, okay, well, I'll move all the furniture around. I couldn't find it. I could not find it. And finally, it's almost equinox, September 2001. And I'm thinking, okay, you know what? You really have this need for yourself to get back in. And I was doing an I Ching reading with 3 coins I had. And one of them falls down, rolls under the same chest of drawers. Oh, boy. I don't know why things disappear down there, but there's obviously a gnome stealing stuff. I move out the chest of drawers. There's the coin, but also, magically, there is my priestess card, which of course is your ultimate link to your source. That's what the path of Gimel represents. That's where all of the coded information is coming down. So I thought, okay, I don't think I need to do any further divination right now. I just got an unmistakable answer. Self-doubt's always been a thing. And when we started out the Temple of Our Lady of the Stars, which is now fused with the Temple of the Silver Star, same people, and it's amazing how many hung in. I was starting this thing and thinking, do I really have any authority to do this? Do I really have an inner plane contact? And there'd been a meditation we'd done years ago when I was in the Temple of Thelema about whether there was a presiding angel over our particular temple in Toronto. And I kept thinking about this angel and its identity and what I'd got in that meditation at the time. And I kept dismissing it, saying, well, you can't go back to the old stuff. Over the altar I'd suspended a sanctuary lamp on a chain. And it had been there for like 7 or 8 months. I'd constantly lit the candle and put the candle holder in and out, no problems. And I was really focused on this name of this angel. And suddenly I heard this tremendous crash. The thing had fallen down and smashed on the altar. It was a message of, will you freaking well, listen, you're getting the name of what you need to be the inspiration underlying things here, but will you that's it. We are making the loudest crash, because it really felt like something had smashed outside the house. It was so loud. This is it. This is your authority. And your authority, when you're running an order or running anything, is like, it's not that you're wonderful. It's like, here's a job to do.
Yeah.
You do it okay. You get supported. The universe is not going to stop you teaching Thelemic ideas and magic to people. But that's a responsibility you've taken on, and you have to do it with 156% of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, even going back to like the process church and that sort of thing, was there like particular experiences during that period of time that might have, buffeted you one direction or another, whether into the process church or out of the process church?
December 1970. I'd been in for about 3 or 4 months, and it was like, okay, this is not what I was expecting. I have to deal with a lot more of me than I was expecting to. You join something, you just think, the light is going to come and you can leave your mundane self behind. And in fact, you've got to sort out a lot of your mundane self. If we had been doing the Tree of Life, which we weren't, we'd have had to deal with Malkuth issues, then the psychological issues of Yesod, and so on. And I completely panicked and took off for 3 days. And I knew where I was going to go, which was, I was going to go to Samye Ling, which Chogyam Trungpa's people had. It actually was started by Namgyal Rinpoche, who was a Canadian who was recognized as an incarnate Lama, who'd taken this old royal hunting lodge in the lowlands of Scotland and turned it into a Buddhist retreat. Mm-hmm. He met Chogyam Trungpa and Akong Tulku when they came to Britain and thought, these guys are really hot stuff. And this is around the time when he himself, because he was a bhikkhu and a bodhi, and he was given the name Namgyal Rinpoche, and the Jalwa Karmapa, the head of the Karmakagyu order, recognized him as the real deal. So basically, he'd given this old royal hunting lodge to Trungpa and Akong Tulku. They had ended up, they're two partly trained Rinpoches, but they're very, very far from their homeland. They're in a very strange place, in a very strange state. They got into basically a black magic battle. Mm. It ended up with Trungpa smashing his car while drunk into the window of a joke shop. And he said, at that point, I realized I had to stop. And that's when he came to the United States. Anyway, I went up to Samye Ling. And it was kind of a place where anyone who was a bit strung out would go. The place was absolutely filled with spirits. I mean, you'd sit in the meditation hall and you'd feel like there were things marching around behind you. It was a freaky place. But the real critical thing was I took a night train up, and I had to make it about 12 miles from the train station to Samye Ling. I thought, well, okay, I'm going to walk. I'm 21 years old. I can walk that far. And I'm trudging, and this is Scotland in early December, so it doesn't get light till about 9 o'clock in the morning. And the train had dropped me about 7 a.m. And I'm trudging through and feeling, you've really made a mess of absolutely everything. You've run off and you don't know what you're doing, but you're scared and you're upset and you're confused. And at that point, a voice came into my head. And I started listening. It was a very calm, sane voice. It wasn't, telling me, revelations about, there are going to be 27 years of warfare before the world ends, and nothing like that. It was just, well, you need to sort yourself out, and you need to accept that you've done what you've done, and you need to accept that you have put yourself into this position. For the rest of that time in the process, I had that voice inside me, and I viewed it as, given our theology, the communicating force was Christ, a very Gnostic version of Christ, not a Jesus-y guy. He was far more in sync with that hymn of Jesus, the lyrics of that, than anything respectably Christian in a middle-class sense.
Dance, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he. That's what comes to mind.
Yes, but it was very calming and very centering. And that stayed with me all the way through. And I don't get it the way I did then, because it was almost an ongoing conversation for a long time. But when I'd been in Thelema for a year or two, I started getting information, little bits of info. I was actually given a true will formula, which I'm not going to mention publicly. One day when I was just going into my little temple space in my apartment in Toronto and thinking, I wonder what my true will is going to be. And a phrase came in. And it's a very dead tone that I get. There's no, it doesn't seem pious. It's not religious. It's not holy. It's not reverent. It's not angry. It's not sad. It's just very absolutely neutral. It's like, this is information. This is how things are. And I can remember going into that temple and thinking, that kind of fits. And then realizing that this applied on all the different levels of my being, and that I was going to have to spend the rest of my life conforming to that in one way or the other. And there'd be 100 different ways I would be doing that. But it just came. It's supposed to come when you get knowledge and conversation, usually for people. I had to do things individually. And a lot of little bits of information like that, they're not, necessarily powerful revelations of cosmic truth. It's just like, well, you have to keep on with this for a while. Or maybe you need to change the altar cloth on the altar to a different color just to signal something else to yourself. You need to go back to an exercise you gave up on last year and see if it feels different now. And I think that is one of the things that comes, again, with this keep on keeping on. There is something that the process taught me that has come back partly in Thelema. Because we were so tightly interwoven and very into each other, we were very much present in the present moment, the here and now. Dharana, you use the Sanskrit term, you're mindful. And that opened us up to a lot of, we use the term telepathy, but really it's more like intuitive empathy, like you sense stuff with people much more. And often there would be things that would be exchanged between people without conscious interaction. And I find that kind of thing is something that Thelema brings you towards. All of the exercises, lesser ritual of the pentagram, middle pillar, all of the other stuff, it's end up in the center of your own center, because that's where you find the truth. And the truth can be something that is absolutely silent. There are a few things more powerful than overwhelming silence. And I think that's a big teacher, because it says you are always, at all times, in the middle of this so-called holy guardian angel, this entirety of your own experience that manifests itself through you, guiding or steering the personality, and in certain ways resembles you on the highest level, and in certain ways is vastly beyond anything you even consciously dream about. So you've always got this tension between, I am a human schmuck walking around trying to do what I need to do today, and this awareness of there is something absolutely transcendental that means all the dreadful things that you think have happened to you or appear to be happening are temporary phenomena. And it's hard, it's very hard to live up to that. Thelemic adepts have very, very bad days. If anything, sometimes it's worse for adepts because you're not as good at hiding with your old camouflage. But that's something I've found that has stayed with me, this communication of things. Maybe not as a voice or words, but sudden knowingnesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see what you think of this. This something that's coming to mind with the idea of sort of being put into positions of having to take on authority, and these ideas of that you're talking about with regard to the holy guardian angel and these types of things. It puts me in mind of the further I go along in the Thelemic path, the more I get a sense that, like, a really good analogy or descriptor for what our work is doing is you're sort of turning, instead of taking on authority, for instance, it's like you're not gaining power in the sense of now I'm in charge. You're refining yourself as the vessel, which is why the cup is such a perfect sort of symbol for this. And you are receiving what's coming through you, so you become the instrument of this thing. And that's sort of like your role with the Holy Guardian Angel as well. So that I can understand where, for instance, like there's this idea of like the Taoist sort of thing, doing everything by doing nothing, and like what you're talking about with silence and that sort of thing. And I feel as though one of the challenges that people who are running groups such as these run into is basically finding a way to do everything by doing nothing, and but you can't fake that. You have to get resonant with the intuitive sort of faculty of that or whatever.
Doing everything by doing nothing, I think, summarizes the whole thing. That the very best teachers is just like, you look at them and it's like, yeah, okay. I don't know either, but it's absolutely okay. You just let this moment continue to the next one and the one after and the one after that. Because if you look at the popular current form of Protestant Christianity, it's all about panicking about everything. Mm-hmm. Judgment's coming. We're going to be, punished and all the rest. Which I could never make sense of. Why would this God thing create a universe and the bits that don't work out perfectly get sent off to eternal judgment, like an eternal torment? Like, what? No. But so we are very optimistic as Thelemites because we know there's going to be another moment and another moment until you have reached a point where the moments simply have gone into something outside of the regular dimensions of space and time. There's just experience of isness, for want of a better term. And then, of course, you want to hang on to that because it's so damn cool when it's just everything's okay. I told you that when I had that conversion experience to join the process, there was this realization God is love. God being absolutely everything in the cosmos, whatever was happening, somehow it involved love. Now, you cannot rationalize that. You can't do a logical analysis and say, well, how do you account for, the wars in the world, the suffering from terrible diseases and starvation and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. And yet that is a Thelemic teaching, which I'd never heard. But, every act is an act of love, says Crowley in a couple of places. You just have to be with that and accept it when it's there and accept it when it's not. And I assume the masters of the temple are rather closer than the rest of us to that one. But I don't know. I certainly hope they are. Man, have we wasted a hell of a long time.
One likes to think.
So, but it is very much about that, just allowing whatever is happening to go through. And Thelema is in a very literal sense about nothing. Nuit is what we're talking about.
Yeah, and the symbol of 0 equals 2, you can sort of take that as, the idea of solve et coagula. I think in Magick Without Tears, Crowley at one point says there are 2 operations possible in the universe. Solve et coagula. So separation and uniting. And so that's sort of speaks to that idea that the nature of God is love, because, well, in order to unite, you need to separate for love's sake, for the chance of union and that sort of thing.
Yes, things have to become properly aligned. And that's led me in, I don't know how many hours, maybe months of my life, I've fretted over the fact that Rahokuit is, I am a god of war and of vengeance. And when I joined the process initially, these people seemed to have a very powerful presence. They were very, you felt they wanted to call it, yes, sir. They just carried, they had power. I'm not a power person. I don't do power very well. Or if I do, I've never noticed it. And of course, that book came to me on that Scottish road in the darkness in December 1970 was what I called Christ at the time, because that was the framework we had. And I pretzelized my own mind again and again, thinking, am I diluting or spoiling my Thelemic progress by looking back to all of the stuff that came to me then? And of course, no, I wasn't. It's just, all you have to do is take the actual experience and drop the externals. Mm-hmm. Rahokuit is the visible object of worship. But just take that sentence apart from chapter 3 of the Book of the Law. What is invisible? What is the subject which comes into us? And even what is worship? Because it's not groveling. It's just simply really, to me, it's really appreciating that presence or nothingness, that emptiness, which is tremendously somethingful, is there all the time. And you don't have to worry about theological descriptors.
Yeah.
There's just the process of going through life and getting further and further into the vastness and ultimately the simplicity of things that lies behind all of the hyper-complexity of everyday life.
Well, I guess another thing that comes to mind is because, the older I get, the more I notice, the shifting of certain concepts and paradigms and that sort of thing, and yet the consistency of other things, so that that's, I think, why part of the reason we end up at some point being like these kids today, because it's like you see the changes there, or you kind of foresee that they're going to go through the exact same things that you went through, and that undermines some of the things that they might see from their perspective at the moment. But like, for instance, you've been there to experience the mindset of the 70s, presumably the 60s, but I don't know how, I imagine the 70s was a little bit more, you were a little more aware at that point, and going into the 90s, for instance, was another really, there was particular mindsets that were prevalent at the time and that sort of thing, so...
I loved the mood of the late 60s. I mean, I was suddenly I'd started a job, so I had some money in my pocket. I was hanging out with the people in the process at their coffee house and their regular activities. So I was with the cool guys. I mean, I was a complete groupie. I just thought these people had the answer to everything. You find somebody when you're 18 or 19 and you know everything. Yeah. Well, no, in fact, they knew far, far less than they thought, but they carried off a very convincing act. And there was just a sense of things opening out in consciousness at that point. I was way too terrified to try acid, but there was a lot of LSD around, and you could feel that it changed the atmosphere, certainly in the city of London. People, they just had a different view of who they were. The 70s, I had already come to Canada, and I was getting married, having kids, trying to start a career. I wouldn't say I was particularly happy at that. And the 80s, as marriage ended, there was that sudden spate of 3 family deaths all in a row, and it's like, now what? And then I took a job with this very insecure boss. To say I was miserable at that point is an understatement. I was just thinking I've done everything wrong. And then in the 90s, for me, it picked up again. I just kind of picked up the thread And that led me back into the process of initiation with the Temple of Thelema, which I still acknowledge as my big teacher, and I have a great sense of gratitude to that order for teaching me everything it did. Jim Eshelman had amassed an enormous amount of Kabbalistic information from all over the place and passed it on. If he had been better at saying, I need, a deputy manager to run this temple, well, I'm the theoretical head, it would have been a different thing entirely. It's sad that it wasn't, but, you need rough experiences to give you the rough experiences you need in order to say, okay, what actually is true from my perspective? What works for me? Where do I fit? What is my role in all this? Each one of us is that little hadith in the middle of an enormous, inconceivably vast tapestry. Also remembering that Thelemites are still just part of the total picture. There's a whole load of things happening. I've been watching the number of people who seem to be converting to a rather mystical version of Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy in the Christian field. They're actually looking for exactly the same thing you would be getting when you take a Thelemic initiation. Kenosis, a link with the divine directly, direct experience of the sacred, greater self-understanding, greater wisdom to address a turbulent time in the world. So that's the Thelemic current working through other vehicles than simply the specifically Thelemic orders. There's just so much happening that we only have to do our own specific bit. The thing is, you need to do that specific area of true will. And you realize, well, what is my true will? Well, look at what you've been doing. Look at what you have accomplished. And the challenges you've met are the things you get to explain to other people. If you've had a rough time and couldn't figure out, where do I fit? What is my role here? Well, that's something you can explain to the next person up, trying to figure out where they fit in. That's part of the chain that the AA embodies in a formal process of initiation. But there's always just this life thing going on as well. And more and more I get convinced that while it's very useful to have grades or degrees in the systems that tell you roughly where you are on the map, the real stuff is going to be very mundane life experiences, or not so mundane life experiences. Sometimes something really wrenching or something rather wonderful can happen. That's the initiation that Thelema is pulling us through.
Well, I guess another factor to that, because you mentioned like there's people who are nowadays trying to cope with some of the stuff going on in the world, and that causes them to want to find something similar to like what we're dealing with like Thelemic initiations, and they might be like seeking that in like a Catholic kind of context or something along those lines. And to me, one of the things I'm fascinated by is sort of the historical evolution of things, like being able to look at historical patterns and that sort of thing. So like, for instance, going back to the 90s again, like the idea that at that time it was pre-9/11, and that's the way that I would parse that in my mind, because it's like we were still in this world where at that time it felt like we were safe. It felt like I've heard it put like it seemed like history was over, these kinds of things. And so at that time there was also a lot of, interest in psychics, interest in angels, interest in the millennium coming up, and that being like, maybe that's the end of the world, and, this sort of thing, the interest in aliens, interest in quantum mechanics and what kind of spooky ideas you could have regarding that, and just these ideas floating around, which can look pretty schmaltzy, by today's standards, looking back at it and looking at all the books sold for all these different, pop spirituality or pop psychology sorts of ideas, but it seemed like a particular kind of mindset that was going on.
A lot was bubbling at that point. There was a lot of people looking for stuff, but if you're going into a process of spiritual seeking, what you are going to have to deal with is the fact that circumstances will change, your appreciation of things will change, the people you are traveling through life with on your spiritual quest will become different, and all of that kind of thing. And getting to the point where you can roll with those shifts in your situation is something that Thelema teaches, and it gives us tools to deal with. It still needs a great deal of courage to keep going and say, I will accept and embrace the next thing that comes up. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to say, okay, I've done enough now. I mean, I know I had a feeling when the Temple of Our Lady of the Stars closed down and almost everybody joined with the Temple of the Silver Star. It's like, okay, we'd always had a connection with the Silver Star. It had always been there. David Shoemaker had been a supporter and advisor to me all through the 10 years that Lady of the Stars was going. But then I thought, well, I'm kind of done now. No, it doesn't happen like that. You've always got things that you end up needing to offer to people, or that you understand, or that you've said to people and they want you to say more because it's come out of a life experience that maybe to you is now, fairly commonplace, but to them is not. And you need to know that you're always going to be on call right until, the day that they stick tubes in your body and warn your relatives that, it won't be long now. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I wasn't expecting. I just thought, okay, you hit your 70s, you can step back. I mean, Lon Duquette's another person. He was in his late 70s and still putting out stuff all the time and still doing books and still conducting ritual. He hasn't stepped back. Mm-hmm. He's probably slowed down a fair bit because biologically you have to, but he has not stepped away from teaching. And ultimately, I think the teaching we offer is just, well, I've done this for a long time, and the fact that I'm still standing is part of the teaching you give people. Mm-hmm. This is my 31st year in Thelema coming up. My initiation anniversary is August 26th. And I keep sort of inwardly looking up to that Kether above my head and saying, how about sending me another mind-blowing realization? It's like the answer is, well, maybe, but probably not, because it doesn't necessarily work like that. But the keep on keeping on thing is very real to me. And trusting that this so-called holy guardian angel is taking us on the journey is critical, and learning to say, at some point, I know you'll throw something to me that's going to be quite interesting and not necessarily unpleasantly interesting.
I guess a good way to think of it is that name, The Process, is kind of a really nice name because of the fact that it's like it actually encapsulates a lot of what you're talking about as well. That it's like, I think we all kind of get into these things with an idea of an end point of some sort or a goal of some sort. And of course we have in the Book of the Law the whole idea of lust, pure will unassuaged to purpose and delivered from the lust of result. And what you're describing sounds like instead seeing things as a process. So seeing your life and your personal expression as an individual as a process.
Yes, very much. I mean, the name was chosen for a very specific reason. It was a sense they had a sense that they slotted into a critical point in history where the West is kind of fading. It was an end of the world cult, which got a bit overdone. But they were aware of environmental destruction, species elimination, and the sense of a certain exhaustion in regular, mundane or spiritual philosophies in Western societies. And of course, the world has taken on so much Western stuff. North American materialism all over Asia, consumerism, and a veering away in Asia from that sense of going from moment to moment that was at least practiced by the serious spiritual figures. The process was very hot as a cult on the idea of karma. I called it the universal law. And that was really inculcated to us, which ends up making you realize you are part of a continuum. You just, okay, everything that I do has an effect on what's around me, and therefore I need to accept that I am part of an everything. Mm-hmm. How I live and speak and act in the middle of the everything as one consciousness unit is the problem that I have to work out as I go through my 7, 8, or possibly 9 decades as an incarnate human at this time. But we know this is an extraordinarily transformative time we're in at the moment, but not necessarily the end of humanity by any means at all. We have more things to do as humans, as a race, as initiates, as seekers. Exactly how it's going to play out, I don't know. But I look back and think, well, I never have known. I couldn't predict anything that was going to happen except when I've consciously chosen to take initiation or go through a ritual of some kind or start a friendship with somebody. Those things you have a certain conscious knowledge of how it might work out. But most of your existence is going into the darkness of not knowing. Mm-hmm. So if I've learned anything over the years, it's like I don't know what's coming up next year. I don't know what's coming up next month. I don't quite know what's going to happen. But it seems to be a rather interesting business going through it phase by phase by phase. And if I can help anybody else trying to figure out how they slot themselves in, it's from telling them bits of my own story and how I ended up where I am, and saying, you just have to find what works for you and stick with it and see where it leads. Mm-hmm. Thelema does, if you commit to Thelema, not just take initiation, but do it with commitment and say, I'm going to try do what I can to make this happen. Cool stuff is going to come to you. Cool things happen. Weird stuff happens. You'll meet some very interesting people who will help you step out of everything you've inherited or acquired along the way into adulthood from people who have good intentions but really don't know anything. And Thelema has answers to a lot of key things if you want to work on it in your life, through ritual, through meditation, through devotional practices, and just studying. Crowley must have died from terminal writer's cramp. He put out so much over the years. It's there. And he said a lot of silly things, but he said mountains of really wise, insightful comments. As far as the HGA goes, to me, at this point, it is the experienced as kind of the entirety of stuff that's going on. And it can throw anything at me that seems appropriate. I might be walking along the street, I'm thinking about a few weeks ago, and suddenly I'm right there in Dharana. It was a nice sunny morning. I'm in central Mexico, not in Toronto. And there was a different quality to things, of an intrinsic meaning in what I was perceiving, what I was experiencing through my senses. It's just the HGA saying, it's going to be okay. It's okay. You, Edward, are a panicker. You have had lifelong anxiety, and you're always afraid that you're going to get abandoned and stuck. But if you keep on doing what you're doing, no, you have not abandoned yourself. So the HGA has a means of coming through. But you have to allow it to do its own thing, rather than demanding that it come through because of some ritual you did, or some thought that came to you the other day, or a book you wrote that gave you an idea. It has to come through in its own time, and it's setting the agenda of things. Mine gave me a scary experience in 1970. It spoke to me later that year when I was walking through the highway in Scotland, and it spoke to me when I went to that winter solstice ceremony in 1994 in Toronto, where I felt the same vibe that I'd known 20 years earlier, that I didn't realize was Thelemic, because I didn't know enough about Thelema. I'd read Crowley's Confessions, and I'd read a bit about him, but I didn't have any real knowledge to build on at that point. Mm-hmm. But it's there, it's coming, and you can rely on the supply of prods and nudges to be inexhaustible, though they don't come when you think they would most be convenient to arrive and give you the boost that you want. But it's there.
So persist. All right. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me on this and being able to open up about like so many personal subjects and that sort of thing. And I would love to keep the discussions coming, and hopefully we'll be able to do many, many more discussions on various topics going into our future seasons and whatnot. This will be the last one I'll be discussing with you for season 5. So hopefully we'll be able to get a bunch in for season 6, of course, as well.
Okay.
All right.
I'll think of some mind-blowing stuff that might...
Unless I've tapped you out and you're done.
Sometimes I think I'm done on this one. I told you I was thinking of retiring, but I've been not allowed to do that yet. So.
All right, well, 93. I'll talk to you soon.
93 to yourself.
Thanks for listening. Find Toronto Thelema online. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and help us grow. And join us again in the Darkly Splendid Abodes.